Good morning, everyone, and happy Wednesday. My office is full of strange energies this morning because I can actually see the lightning flashing out of the corner of my eye, and I can hear the thunder outside. And it's strange being this high up in an apartment building. It's amazing, actually, to see the weather systems blow in and out. And right now, all of the towers are cloaked in clouds, and it's very ominous and mysterious and dark outside. And even though it should be the full light of day, it's still dark and feels like it's morning. And it's one of those days that's going to just perpetually feel like morning, like the day never comes because the light never comes and we're just in the clouds right now. So it's actually a great atmosphere for me to share with you more about Tomorrow City, which is this imaginary world that I've been cooking up in my dreams and in the mornings and on paper and sometimes on the computer and sometimes while I'm talking to you guys here. Tomorrow City is a strange place. It's similar to the city that I live in South Korea, but it's different in the same way that Gotham is similar but different to New York City. It's a fantastical world, and in the form of urban fantasy, magic lurks. Magic is real, magic is present, but magic is always lurking behind the veil of the normal. Magic is always just behind the curtain, and those who are in the know are in the know, but most people, the muggle world, the regular people like you and I, are not in the know. And that's what makes these kind of urban fantasy stories so fun, I think, is they play on that, not emotion, but that idea or that interest that we all have, that maybe there's something magical there that we just can't quite see it, or if we just knew which door to open or which button to push or which person to talk to, that we might be able to step through the door, step through the wardrobe, step through the portal, and be in a different world altogether, a different land altogether. And that's really what fantasy is a sort of escape. It's a sort of moving past, a sort of moving out of the world that you're used to. And that's why fantasy is the great escapism of literature. I think more than any other genre, it embodies that pleasure and feeling and fun that we get when we are able to get outside of our own world, get outside of our own head, and jump into somebody else's world just for a little bit. Last Wednesday, I told you guys that I was about to go on some vacation. And while I had some extra time, I was hoping to do as much work as possible. And as you can guess, I succeeded on some days and failed on other days. But I'm happy to report that I did do a lot of writing. For me, a lot of writing is, what is a lot of writing for me? Well, if we're talking just strict writing words that become a fiction story, putting words on the paper, the most important or the most basic form of writing, the most easy to understand form of writing, then for me, a productive day is if I can write anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 words, then I feel good. I've had days where I've written a lot more than that, and obviously I've had a lot of days where I can't write that much. But if I'm writing 1,000 words, 2,000 words, 3,000 words or more, then that's definitely a productive day for me. But when I'm in this, right now I'm still in the mode of outlining my novel and brainstorming. So a lot of the quote unquote writing that happens is ideas, is plotting, is me getting to a point in the outline where I say, all right, I know that this is going to happen, but why is it going to happen? And then making a list. Instead of getting just stuck on that question and not moving forward, I'll make a list and write down all the possibilities, and that usually opens up some doors where I'm more interested in one idea than another, and then I can go down that route. And so a lot of the writing that I did over the weekend was getting inspiration from other stories and continuing to outline and plot and find a more concrete image for my story, where I've been trying to build something stable and build something sturdy out of this cloud of ideas and inspiration that I've been having for this story, for Tomorrow City. So I'm happy to report that the writing went well, and as promised, I said that I would share some of what I did and share some of what I actually wrote about Tomorrow City, and I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to share a few different snippets. Right now, as I said, the writing that I'm doing is not exactly linear. It's not like I'm writing chapter 1 and chapter 2, because I'm not ready to do that yet, because I don't fully know my ending, and I'm getting closer to that, and I made exciting progress on that this weekend. But I'm not doing that kind of writing yet, where when I'm drafting with other novels I've written, once I get in that zone, then that's really exciting, because that's actually the push of the first draft, where you're saying, all right, this scene I'm writing today, tomorrow scene 2, the next day scene 3. Right now I'm writing more snapshots and ideas, and I'll write these long expositions where I'm not sure which character is going to say it. I don't know where exactly it's going to fit in the story, but it's something that comes to me about the world, so, whether that's an image or an event happening, or someone just talking about Tomorrow City, where I'm sort of telling the story of this place to myself as I write it, as I learn it. So I'm going to read to you a few snapshots, a few things that I've written, and they all together are helping me create a picture of this world that I'm working on. Okay, so here's the first one. This is one of my characters, and they are talking about Tomorrow City. I thought maybe this would be on maybe on the back cover of a book, or maybe one of those teaser pages, or something that just gives people a snapshot of the world, sort of a quotable passage. Anyway, here it goes. Weird shit happens in Tomorrow City. Let me be clear. I mean weird in the true sense of the word, the old one, the real one. Today we have a watered-down sense of weird. We think it means oddly colored hats or the odd day of snow in late spring. While bizarre and fantasy do speak part of the truth, there are another two meanings that hit closer to home, closer to the true center of weird. First is the true weird, the weird which is unearthly or supernatural. Tomorrow City is most certainly weird in this way. Second is the old weird, which is concerned with fate or destiny. Tomorrow City, I came to find out the hard way, is most definitely weird in this way too. Weird shit happens in Tomorrow City. Not the kind of shit that happens in the back alleys of Paris or Berlin or Manhattan after midnight. It's less sinister than that. Less dark, less smoky. Not the kind of weird shit that happens in backwoods Alaska or middle America, rural America, during the cold and quiet evenings of winter. It's not quite as simple as empty beer cans and shotgun shells and fires gone cold. It's less pure than that, less evergreen, less natural. It's not even the kind of weird shit that happens in laboratories and nuclear testing grounds and war councils behind closed doors. It's less political than that, less organized, less sterile. No, the brand of weirdness that I found in Tomorrow City is a strange blend of modern and ancient energies that, as far as I know, and I'm just a werewolf, telling you what experts have told me, that this strange blend of energies in this city is actually unique. Unique in kind, unique in place, unique even in history. Okay, so that's one. I don't even know if that would actually go in any story, but it's just kind of fun. Gives me an idea of what Tomorrow City is like, and it's sort of vague and I don't know, fake scholarly, or it's a little too wordy and weird. And if I ever did involve that in one of the stories, then I would have to tweak it a lot, depending on who was saying it and why they were saying it. But anyways, I'm not judging. I'm not going to apologize for my work. I'm just going to share some things that I've been thinking and working on. So that was an example of something that's a little more zoomed out and vague. Now here's something that's a little more specific, like an actual event that might be happening in the story. So here is the second passage that I'm going to share with you now about strange happenings in Tomorrow City. A young man limped through the park with a 12-ounce bottle of soju in one hand and a tattered black backpack in the other. It was late in the evening, but white lamps lit the pathway at regular intervals, shining through the pink and white leaves of cherry blossom trees in full bloom. Tomorrow City's most famous towers ring the borders of Central Park, lighting up the nighttime sky with spectacular fluorescent lights and futuristic eccentric designs. It was Friday night in the big city. The cute couples and well-dressed families and merry groups of friends cast short glances at the strange, limping man as they passed him. Call it a Korean politeness or a big city tendency to mind your own business, but the passers-by did not stare at the young man nearly as much as he deserved. Besides being light-skinned in a crowd of Koreans, the young man was wearing an orange cloth t-shirt and an orange pair of matching cloth shorts, the kind of outfit that you get whenever you visit a Korean sauna. Besides the fact that the young man was limping, that his right knee was bleeding, and that he was gripping a bottle of alcohol by the neck like a drunk. Besides all that, he was also barefoot. He plodded onward, every few steps pausing to cast quick glances over his shoulder. Each glance confirmed to him the thing that he dreaded most, the reason that he kept doggedly on. It confirmed the fact that he was being followed. 20 yards back, a well-dressed Korean man stalked the limping man with a cold, quiet intensity. His composure was the complete picture opposite of the limping young man. He wore black loafers, black slacks, and a long-sleeve white-colored shirt, all of it perfectly fitted to his slim, athletic body, all of it looking as if it were purchased yesterday and iron-pressed an hour ago. When the limping man turned off the main path and onto a dirt path that led into the trees, the well-dressed man followed. He stayed at a distance, never falling behind, but never exerting himself in order to catch up either. Now they were off of the main trail. A young couple sat giggling on a park bench, but after the limping man passed them, there were no more people, only trees. He broke into a run, the sweat beaded on his face, and the terror of sleeplessness and paranoia ringed his eyes in dark circles. He knew that he'd only have one chance, and he would need to make it count. He ducked behind a particularly large pine tree just as his pursuer turned off the trail and into the trees. He dropped his backpack at his feet, put his back to the tree, and brought the green glass bottle up to his chest, clutching it upside down in both hands like the neck of a baseball bat. He closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. Please, God, please, God. I'm no god, but I may be of service. What is it that you need, young man? The young man's eyes shot open, and the bottle of alcohol dropped from his hands. What the? Down here. I'm taller than most of my kind, but shorter than most of yours. The young man looked down and found himself staring at what he could only describe as a short, red-skinned creature. Never seen a goblin before? The creature asked. The young man opened his mouth to speak, but finding no words, closed it again. The goblin leaned to the side, peering behind the young man, casually saying, "It appears you have a follower." "Listen," the young man said, eyes going wide, urgency returned to his face. "I don't know who the fuck you are, but this guy is... Would you like me to make him go away?" The young man stared wildly at the goblin, breathing heavily, trying his best to calculate his options and choose the wisest one. "I'm happy to make him go away," the goblin said easily. "All I ask in return is 3 favors from you. And by the way, I never do business with someone I don't know. My name is Yubin," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. "We can discuss the particulars of the deal later. Just shake my hand and our deal will be sealed." The young man extended his hand. It trembled lightly. The goblin smiled. He had a mouth full of sharp yellow teeth that the young man hadn't noticed until now. His hand felt leathery and warm, but human enough. "Now, if you'll excuse me," the goblin said, and disappeared behind the tree. Okay, so that is a scene that I've been well, that's not a full scene from the story. Obviously, in the scene, you would find out what happens next. It wouldn't end there. And I would probably actually tell that story in first person because it would be the main character, Sal. He would be telling the story as it happens to him. But I wrote it in third person just because I was picturing, again, I'm trying to tell the story of this world to myself. So as a third person, omniscient narrator, I'm looking down at the park and watching this event happen. So I would probably rewrite it in the first person if it actually goes in the book and happens that way. But I'm excited to write the goblins. I'm still learning about them, but they're going to play a big part in the story. And I don't know if that'll be the exact way that the main character meets his first goblin, but whatever that first meeting is, it's going to be fun to write. And then writing that little deal with the devil scene is going to be fun whenever I'm able to get to that point. Okay, so one more. This last one that I'm going to read to you is something that I actually scribbled in my notebook yesterday, and this is more like the first scene, which is more of a zoomed out description of Tomorrow City. Maybe I think it'll be our main character looking back from an older age and remembering what Tomorrow City was like. The point of this passage was just to try to describe the city a little bit and ground the reader in some of the senses that would help them to see it and feel what it's like. But this is heavy and is more expositional, so I don't know if it'll actually be useful in the novel. But anyways, these kinds of things are useful just for, again, telling the story of the city to myself and describing it to myself as I learn about it. So this is the last passage, the third thing that I'll read for you today. Cold, clean lines. That's what I think about when I picture Tomorrow City in my memory. When I focus, when I resist the deep-seated urge to flee, to look away, to forget. Cold, clean lines. Perfect towers of steel and glass, shining in the cold winter sun, running vertically in perfect harsh lines against the background of the soft blue sky. Towers upon towers, crowding the island with the sea on 3 sides like so many steel and glass candles pushed into a birthday cake for the gods. I feel the crass Siberian winter winds across my reddened cheeks. I smell the hot soups and the fresh breads and the charred espresso of the cafes, the cinnamon scent of the pine trees that fill the parks and bend with the wind. I bend with the wind. My neck cranes skyward in awe of those towers. When the clouds pass behind their tops, it gives the illusion that the towers are swaying. But I know that it's only an illusion, and it's only one of many illusions. I know, for example, that while there are no cars and no roads above ground in Tomorrow City, that a vast network of vehicles and tunnels and transport and commerce is taking place beneath my feet. I know that although there are no public security cameras, no CCTV, no satellite surveillance, that someone or something in Tomorrow City is always watching. I know that the forest parks hold wonders, that the businesses tucked safely away in the sprawling network of towers hold everything from cake shops and law offices to black magic peddlers and arms dealers. And I know that while thousands of people pass by on foot, on scooter, on bike, and board and cart, and while the city seems to be one of the masses, one for the people and by the people, that there is really only one person in the city who matters, one person who holds all the power, all the sway, capable of turning the city on its side like a snow globe at the slightest hint of his fancy. That man, you might say, is the reason for this story. That man has many names, but you probably know him as the man in the tower. Oh my God, the storms are coming on now. It's lightning every few seconds. It's just a wall of white outside my window, and I can actually hear the rain. The rain is beating sideways against the window right now. Very creepy this morning. Oh my God, there's another huge flash of lightning. It's a good morning. I chose to read from Tomorrow City, this strange place, this weird place. And maybe in reading these things, it gives a picture. I like that it gives a kind of snapshot in time, because hopefully in another few months and years later down the road, when these stories are finished and they're published and Tomorrow City has actually taken shape and a lot of these things have become final, it'll be fun to look back at a time when it was in such a nebulous form and a lot of this stuff is just ideas. And so as I write these things and these snapshots that come to me, it all helps me form the city and the world that I'm working on. But the most important thing that I'm working on right now is the outline, and that's the step-by-step, the scene outline that I have written out of what happens in the first scene, what the main character does as he's going through the airport, going through customs, he gets stopped there, and then who he meets first in Tomorrow City when he comes into the city and what transpires after that. I'm feeling excited about my outline right now. I won't go into detail about that today. Maybe it'd be fun to do that on another episode. But I did want to make good on my promise that I made last week, which was to actually share some things that I had written about Tomorrow City. So I hope those suffice. I hope those serve as worthy candidates. They're not actually scenes, but they are things that I wrote this week to help me build out and visualize this world. This is going to have to be a little bit of a shorter episode today. I'm going to the big city this afternoon. It's going to be an adventure because of this weather, but I'm going to the big city this afternoon. My wife has some appointments and we have some plans together, and then I'm also excited to spend some time we're going to Gangnam, and I just love going to Seoul, and I'm going to bring my computer and bring my notebook and bring my books, and I will keep working on this outline. I don't have a lot of other news this week. I'm almost finished with Full Moon, which is the next Harry Dresden novel. I'm still trying to immerse myself in urban fantasy and take inspiration from other kingpins of the genre. So I'll probably talk more about Full Moon after I finish it. The only other thing, the biggest news, the biggest event that I can think of that's happened to me in the last week, especially in the fantasy, on the topic of fantasy, is that I discovered this insane podcast. The podcast is called Hello from the Magic Tavern. I discovered this podcast totally on accident. I was on iTunes, and I went to podcasts on iTunes on my computer because I was actually going to type in my own podcast to make sure that my last episode had uploaded correctly. And this podcast scrolled across my feed, and it has a really great cover art, which is the cover art is just this yellow, it's a bright yellow background, and then on the cover there's a raven and a podcast mic. So the raven is, the Edgar Allan Poe, sort of a symbol of fantasy or horror. And then the podcast mic, and then it says hello from the Magic Tavern. And I clicked on it, and I saw that this podcast had a big following and all these reviews, and it's been going on for a long time. And I think the 3rd season just started. So I'm late to the game on the Hello from the Magic Tavern stuff, but I started listening to the first episodes, and they're so good. I just love when I stumble across something that's unique, and that's totally how I feel with this podcast. I've never heard anything like it. It's weird, it's quirky, and it's just totally original. It's so refreshing. And what it is these improv guys from Chicago. So these guys are actors. They're professional improv guys and girls and people of all kinds. But the one who started it, he's a guy. His name, I actually don't know what his real name is. Anyways, they came up with this hilarious premise, which is that this guy was in Chicago, and he went to the Burger King drive-thru, and he accidentally went through a portal and found himself in a fantastical realm, this fantastical town called Foon. And so now he's in this fantasy world, and there are shapeshifters and talking badgers and wizards and elves and dwarves and all the kind of weird, funny stuff that you would... It's really a comedy. Really, the podcast is a comedy. What's so funny is that these guys are ad-libbing, but as they create they're sort of creating the world on the fly. It's so interesting from a fantasy and world building perspective that, especially in the beginning, every episode they were just making shit up about this fantastical world of Foon. And the premise is just genius. So Arnie, the human who accidentally goes through the portal near the Burger King in Chicago, and now he's in this magical world of Foon. Well, he decides to start podcasting because he had his podcast equipment with him. So every week he's in the bar, he's in the tavern. That's one of the top. That's a fantasy trope right there, right? Is the bar, the tavern, the inn, the Wayward Inn. So he's at the tavern and he's podcasting, and he just interviews whoever comes through the tavern, whether that's a elf or a dwarf or a goblin or a wizard. And what's so hilarious and clever about the show is that these guys are all ad-libbing, and they're just making stuff up as they go. But it's fun to listen as it goes on. The characters get more defined. He has his co-hosts, quote-unquote co-hosts, who are like his two best friends, are this talking badger and then this wizard. And the chemistry that they have just gets better and better as the episodes go on. If you're not that into fantasy, it maybe is a little nerdy for you, but I even let my wife listen to it, and I thought for sure she'd be like, this is too goofy, too nerdy, but she was laughing and she liked it too. So there's something comedic about it that I think everyone can enjoy. I just couldn't believe I had never heard of this podcast before, because it seems so popular and it's been around for 4 years or something, and the 3rd season is coming out now. And but the biggest thing for me is I just love. There's something I'm really attracted to with podcasts, telling stories in podcasts. I listened to this novel series by Michael J. Sullivan, that's his name. Really great author, fantasy author, and he wrote this really fun series called the Riyria Chronicles. And one time I listened to the whole series on a podcast, and it was a really fun way to consume this story. And it was you could get into the groove of like when when you listen to your favorite podcast and you hear that intro music and you feel, oh, this is familiar, I know what I'm getting into. It's kind of, for me, with my favorite shows, when I'm commuting or going somewhere, I put on that podcast and it's this familiar voice in my ears, and it's very comforting and it was a very good feeling. And when I listened to that story, the Riyria Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan, it was one of the best sort of reading experiences I'd ever had, where I'd turn on the new chapter of the audiobook. That's the thing, it was an audiobook, but he released it. He did this special project, which was kind of different and unique, where it was actually in podcast form. So I could just download each chapter, and the music, the fantasy music would come on, the dun 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 dun, whatever it was, and that would put me in the zone, and I'd be ready to listen to the story. It was so good, and I loved it. And I haven't really experienced something like that again until this Magic Tavern podcast, which I just found. It's so fun to listen to these episodes as the story develops. Anyways, all that to say, I really think that the podcasting space is interesting and full of potential. And when I found this Magic Tavern podcast, it kind of blew my mind that, wow, there's so many things that we don't know that just haven't been tried, because the podcasting medium is relatively new and relatively unexplored. And I especially like the blend of story, a fantasy story being told in a podcast format is very intriguing to me. And the couple times when I've found it, when I've stumbled across it, I've really loved it. So I think there's something there for me in my future. And I definitely want, whether that's creating some kind of new podcast that is a fantasy story, I would love to do that. Or whether that's just when I do write my first novel, either reading it myself in podcast episodes or hiring a professional who can actually do different voices and who's actually a professional audio person, a narrator. That's what I'm trying to say. Whether that's trying to bootstrap it and do it myself, which I've heard is way harder than it sounds. Recording audio is no joke. Recording an audiobook is not easy by any means, and only if you've never done it before, you might say, oh, anybody could do that. But then it's one of those things where when you actually try to do it, then you realize you're in over your head. That's what I've heard. So I don't know exactly how it will look, but I definitely want to explore ways to either produce my books, my stories in podcast form, or to make new stories in podcast form. I just think that there's a lot of potential there because audio is trending upward. More and more people are listening to audiobooks than ever before. More and more people listening to podcasts. It's such a great way to take in stories, and I think there's something very natural and primal about just hearing people talk that takes us back to our roots as humans and storytellers long before we had even the written word. So it makes sense to me that these things are trending upwards and that people like them and that they're getting more popular. So I don't know what that'll look like, but I think it's interesting. And you know how sometimes there's things in your creative life where you're like, obviously you're not ready for that now, but you do want to keep it in mind and keep brainstorming, because maybe sometime down the road you will be ready for it. And that's how I feel with these, something about a fantasy world and podcast form I really like and will always be in the back of my mind. But if you take nothing else from this, then please go download Magic Tavern. You can still find, it's called Hello from the Magic Tavern. You can still find the first episodes if you search for them. And I'm having a lot of fun. I've listened to like the first 15 episodes so far. All right, I got to go to Seoul. That's all I've got time for today. Thanks for indulging me. And if you have any feedback about Tomorrow City, please let me know what you think. Obviously these are just first draft forms and ideas, so these are not finished products. But that's the point of this show, is that I get to develop my stories as I go, and it's my show and it's raw, and those are the things I'm working on right now. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you stay safe out there. If the weather is anywhere near as crazy in your world as it is in mine. But as always, thank you for listening. Have an amazing week. Happy Wednesday. And as always, I will be back next week with more.